Every teacher that I know of goes into the teaching profession and they have this burning desire to impact students. And they want to make a difference. They want to change lives. They want to do all kinds of good things. And there is this idealistic idea, I guess you could say, that somehow all the crayons are going to get back into the box and students are going to do precisely what they're asked to do. And everything's going to be this sort of Pollyanna type experience. And then the teacher gets into the midst of actual teaching and begins to learn about the hard work of teaching. And what they discover is that their impact is not as impactful, you might say, as they thought it was going to be. And they begin to struggle and they begin to worry and they begin to try to make all different types of changes. And if they're not careful, they end up working themselves into a place of burnout. And so that's what we want to talk about tonight. We want to talk about the hidden truth behind teacher burnout and student impact, or making student impact. And the truth is that impact rarely ever feels like impact. In particular, whenever you're in the process or whenever you're in the middle of trying to work, because what it really feels like as a teacher is it feels like showing up every day, grading papers, answering questions, having parents tell you how you really should be doing your job, uh, and listening to unsupportive admin a lot of times. And unfortunately, in our case, those that come all the way from the uh, from the district side that seemingly know how to do everything that nobody else knows how to do. And they put all these different types of mandates on top of us. And what's happens is instead of making impact, or at least feeling like we make impact, we end up working a lot of long hours and a lot of long days. And that over time takes a toll, not just on our body, but also on our psyche, on our emotional health, and on our spiritual health. And so, how do we survive that? How do we get through that period of time? And Teacher Talk is a faith forward organization, and we're not faith forward because we want to be offensive, but that's just simply who we are. And so the beginning of getting through these long days and our ability to make impact is found in Proverbs chapter 16 and verse number 3. And it says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans." If we haven't met yet, my name is John. And as I just said, this is Teacher Talk. And this is a live podcast. And for the life of me, I don't even know why we call these things podcasts anymore, because the iPod, does it even exist anymore? Is that even still around? I haven't got a clue. Obviously, that's where the term podcast came from. And maybe we do have it. I don't have one. I never had one. And so let's get into our topic. What happens when our calling collides with the classroom or with reality? Every teacher starts with a vision, but reality tests that vision and will test that calling very quickly. Every teacher has a dream of shaping lives, of changing the future, of impacting students, of seeing students go on to do great things. And oftentimes we're extraordinarily disappointed. I know I struggled with a disappointment this week because in my role as dean of students, I deal with hundreds of students every single day. But sometimes students make decisions that disappoint me to a level that I can't even express, almost to the point of dismay. And that's what we run into as teachers. And then there's the issue of the reality of the classroom and behavior issues, in particular today. That's one of the top reasons why Teachers are leaving the profession today right behind the idea of unpaid overtime, the amount of hours that we have to work, a lack of supportive admin and things of that nature, is student behavior. In some places in America, student behavior is completely off the hook. Now, I have to tell you, and I have to say, and I have to brag, in my district and where I work at my school, we're kind of like an outlier. We're in a place where you can discipline students, and sometimes in some ways, others would look at that and they would say, "Man, that was kind of harsh, don't you think?" But students need consequences, and teachers need support. Then there's the amount of work that goes into teaching. I think most new teachers or folks that maybe come out of one profession and into the teaching profession underestimate just how much work there is that has to be done as a teacher. And it's not just found in the grading, the documentation of IEPs and 504s and various accommodations, the turning in of lesson plans, parent conferences, the answering of emails. It is a relentless job. And ultimately and finally, the reality that sets in when the calling collides with the classroom, the emotional fatigue. I'm gonna take that another level and talk about the cognitive fatigue. And what one of the interesting things about cognitive fatigue, I did a podcast a while back, and you can catch it right there. It depends on where you're at. If you're on Spotify, all you got to do is come down a few episodes. If you're on YouTube, you can find it right here in this playlist. And I talked about a device called Socrate. And Socrate is an AI device that listens to the voice of the teacher in the classroom. And at the end of the day, it downloads a summary of everything the teacher did. And the ideal behind that device is to alleviate the cognitive fatigue that teachers deal with. So if you get a chance, go check that out. The emotional fatigue. All right. Secondary trauma. And I don't know, we don't talk about that a whole lot in education, but secondary trauma is what teachers deal with when their students experience trauma outside the classroom or inside the school or whatever it is, and then they bring that trauma into the classroom. A lot of times it comes out in their behavior, or it comes out in a crisis, a mental health crisis of the student, or unfortunately, many students harm themselves, self-harm, or other aspects that end up in Baker Act. And we struggle with that because we care about our students and we don't want our students to be hurt. That's the reality of the classroom. And a lot of teachers underestimate that. And then there's the spiritual fatigue of how this wears us down in our spiritual calling, in our faith. It's the reality. It's very difficult. And so, what do you do when your calling feels more like a burden than a blessing? The very first thing that most teachers begin to do is they begin to question themselves. They begin to question their calling. And that's exactly what we want to talk about. We want to encourage teachers tonight because that is the mission and goal of Teacher Talk, is to restore joy to the classroom one teacher at a time. And if you are the one teacher on the other end of this, we want to welcome you in and we want you to know, hey, be encouraged right here tonight. Now, the first thing that I'd like for you to know or to understand or to gain a hold of is impact does not always look like transformation. Sometimes impact takes perseverance. And here are some lies that we struggle with, I think, as teachers and that of our calling, and they will twist our calling and they'll twist our way of thinking. And that is that we confuse impact with immediacy. If we don't see the results of our work immediately, we begin to feel like that we're not making an impact at all. And I want you to know that that is a lie. It's a lie because impact, in particular student impact, is oftentimes made over a long period of time. I'm very fortunate that I work in a middle high school. Grades 6 through 12 are in my school, and I can literally spend 7 years with a single student or with multiple cadres of students. And over that 7 years, there's an ebb and flow. There's good times, there's bad times, there's sorrowful times, there's times that we celebrate, there's times that we have great times of joy. And there's oftentimes in the middle of that very difficult times where it seems like we're not making any progress whatsoever. And yet I've been in this business long enough to know now where students that I've coached or I've served as dean of students or I taught in the classroom, they've gone on to be adults, they've gone on to have families. And you look back and you see the great things really along the way that happened that you couldn't see in the midst of the things that were happening at the time because we become blinded by our circumstances. We become blinded by the difficulties that we're facing, whether it's with the mandates that are placed on top of us, whether it's with the workload or whatever it is. So don't confuse impact with the amount of time that it takes because impact rarely ever happens immediately. And so here are three subtle lies that we believe when we try to confuse impact with immediacy. Number one, if it's hard, it must not be my calling. Now, I want you to think about that because, in some ways, we do live in a society that does not like to do hard things. We like things to go strictly as planned, to work out exactly the way that they should, or at least the way that we think that they should. And whenever we run into barriers, we very quickly want to give up. And I tell you, I see that more and more, in particular as a varsity coach. Of course, I don't coach anymore, but I coached many, many years varsity level sports. And the grit that many of our students have today is non-existent. And some of that is seen in some of our newer teachers today. They get in, they find out it's hard. They say, man, I really thought that this was for me. I really thought this was my calling. For some people, they would say, hey, I really believe that God called me to do this or God brought me to this point. And they think to themselves, if God brought me to this, then why in the world would it be so hard? Why wouldn't he just make it easy? Well, the scripture is very clear. He says to count it all joy when you encounter various trials. Life is tough. It's hard, but we are, and it's in those moments of difficulty that we are shaped as people and as human beings. Number two, if I can't see results, I'm not making a difference. And I want to go back to our opening segue right there. You might not see results on the front end. It may be 2 or 3 or even many years down the road. Even academic results we may not see. And I know that we want to see student growth in the classroom, we want to see academic achievement, but the truth of the matter is that we might not see that. I think back to my teachers and how disappointed my teachers must have been with me. I tell my students all the time, I graduated high school with a 1.82 grade average. You can't get out of high school with a 1.82 grade average today. I went to school in the 70s and 80s when you didn't have to take standardized tests, and all you had to do was pass the class in order to graduate. And so maybe we've come some good way, a good, or maybe we've had some good things happen down through the years that have changed some of that. But I imagine that my teachers looked at me and says, "Look, I have poured my heart into this kid. I've done everything I can to help him learn, and yet he just does not respond." I bet many of them did feel like they were failing or that they were letting me down. But here's the facts. They didn't let me down. I let them down. So don't confuse the fact that we don't see results in the fact that, or to cause us to believe that we're not making a difference. On Facebook nowadays, a lot of the teachers that taught me are now my friends or those that I associate with on Facebook. And I wonder what they think now. This is the kid that I couldn't get to turn in his homework. He wouldn't do his math. As a matter of fact, I failed algebra, I failed pre-algebra, I failed biology, I failed earth or environmental science, on and on and on. Had to go to summer school. I failed English, right? And I wonder what they think now. This guy, he's working in a school. He's the dean of students. And yet every one of them had a say in my future. They planted seeds that have now flourished all these years later and brought me to the point that I'm at today. And number three, don't believe this lie. The lie that twists our calling is that if I slow down, somehow I'm letting others down. I want you to know that teaching is tough. It's always been tough, and it's always going to be tough. And I know that you already know that. Um, and oftentimes we feel like that working ourselves into exhaustion is a badge of honor. And I want you to know that it's not a badge of honor. It's really a way to work yourself out of a career where you can make high level impact over time. So don't think that if you learn how to say no to things and that you change instead of volunteering for everything, even things that you weren't asked to volunteer for, don't think that if you stop doing those things that somehow you're letting other people down. You're not. And I want to tell you why. Because the best thing that you can give to your students, to your principal, and to your organization is the most healthiest version of yourself possible. Anything less than the most healthiest version of yourself, then you are failing your students. Do not buy the lie that if I slow down and take care of myself, that somehow I'm failing my students or I'm failing my organization. The scripture is very clear. Trust in the Lord, right? Don't trust in yourself, but trust in the Lord, and He will make your path straight. He will bring about your plans. Commit those things to Him. So, what do we do? We get past these lies, and yet our calling still feels overwhelming. And the first thing that I want to say is you got to redefine impact. But I also wanted to point out, or I think it's important to point out, that the calling of a teacher is always going to feel like it's overwhelming because there is so much riding on the line, right? Human development, at the very least, is what's riding on the line. But you got to redefine impact. We have to redefine impact. The greatest impact often happens through quiet faithfulness. And what I mean by that is that impact is not always and is rarely ever dramatic. One of the things that we like as people is we like to see the sudden breakthroughs. We like to see the big breakthroughs. And I guess we get those every once in a while, but not very often. For the most part, making an impact is cumulative. And that's why we said earlier that making an impact happens over time. It happens through perseverance, or in this case, quiet faithfulness. It is a cumulative effect of consistent, everyday, faithful actions, meaning that we show up and we're prepared. We treat our students with kindness. We teach with diligence. We love those who are around us. Those things, for lack of other things, when done on a daily basis in small increments, they accumulate over time to make an impact in the life of a student that they will never forget. I can remember whenever I was in the first grade. If you don't mind, go ahead and take up a cup of coffee here. Again, I don't know where you're listening or watching. If you're watching on YouTube, jump in here and grab a cup of coffee and enjoy it. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple, go ahead and get yourself a cup of coffee there as well. I love coffee, so I'm going to have a drink of it if you don't mind. And oh, by the way, I love coffee so much. I put a link down in my thing. So if you appreciate the work that we do here at Teacher Talk, because everything we do is free, it runs completely off of any kind of donations that anybody provides. There is a link in my bio where you can buy me a cup of coffee, and if you would do that, I would appreciate that. So I can remember talking about the impact of a teacher over time. I remember my first grade teacher, Miss Birchfield. She called me a pest, of all things. She called me a pest. And I have never, ever, ever forgotten those words. I'm 53 years old. I guess I was probably 6 in the first grade. I have never forgotten the fact that she called me a pest. On the other hand, Lee Walters, Mr. Walters, I guess he was my economics teacher in high school. He actually taught us in middle school for a little while. I think he was a social studies teacher, he was a PE teacher. But more importantly, he was my basketball coach. And he didn't call me a pest. What he told me is he told me that I could be the next best NBA player. Now, I look back on that and I find that to be ridiculous. And the reason why is because I'm 5'7". I can't jump. I could play basketball whenever I was a kid. I was pretty good. I could shoot, and things of that nature. I guess I was above average. But he referred to me as the guy that could go on to college and go on to play ball in the NBA. And guess what? I haven't forgotten that either. I remember that to this day. Now, both of those teachers had an impact. In one moment, my first grade teacher, Miss Birchfield, labeled me as a pest. And by the way, she was probably right, at least in that moment. She was frustrated. But on the other hand, my coach labeled me as far more than what I could ever be. There's no way I could ever be an NBA player. No way. I'm still only 5'9". No way. But he planted a seed that said, John, you're not living up to your potential. There's more that you can do. And he planted that seed over and over and over. And a cumulative effect of the work that he did is in part why I am who I am today and why I am where I am. Listen, the greatest impact teacher is often happens through quiet faithfulness. Number 2, rest, reflection, and boundaries amplify influence more than overwork. Why is that true? And it's because the emotionally, cognitively, mentally, and spiritually fatigued teacher is not an effective teacher. If you are a burned out teacher because you're working yourself to death, you're trying to get it all done, you're taking your work home, which you should never do, by the way. We should never bring our work home and allow work to invade our sacred space where we live, where we rest, where we love our families, where we have conversations, where it's intended to have fun. Do not ever bring your work home. That's my suggestion. And by the way, you don't have to finish all your work either, because there's always going to be work as a teacher. So if you're doing those things and you are on the brink of burnout, or if you're on the brink of exhaustion, or you're suffering with chronic stress, you are not effective. You can't be effective in those ways. And as a matter of fact, if that's where you're at, no matter how hard you work, you will never convince yourself that you're making any progress whatsoever. Learn to rest and reflect and to set boundaries. Down in the description box, if you're looking on YouTube, or in the show notes, if you're on Spotify, there are some free guides down there. There's a 5-minute reset. You can keep it right at your desk and you can use it over and over and over. It doesn't matter what day it is or what situation it is. There's a couple of prompts there. I think it's like 4 quadrants that you can work through it. I say 5-minute reset. You can probably get through it in less than 5 minutes, or you can take longer than 5 minutes. The point is, it's free. It's down there for you. So jump down there and grab it. Also, there's a guide down there, how to reclaim your limits, about setting boundaries. Again, it's free. It's 100% free, and it's always free. And I made it specifically for teachers. So feel free to jump down there and grab that thing. Number 3, you can't be light, or you can't relight your flame if you never recharge. You cannot carry the burden of a teacher if you're completely exhausted. And so you have to pace yourself. Impact happens over time through quiet faithfulness. The writer of the Proverbs in Proverbs chapter 11, verse number 25 says, "Whoever refreshes others will himself be refreshed." Think about that. Whoever refreshes others will himself be refreshed. And so here's the thing. I want to invite you to a renewal, and it's an invitation. And the first thing that I want you to know, and I want you to hear, is that long days, hard work, failures, miscues, that does not mean that you are not impacting students. It doesn't mean that you aren't impacting the people around you. You can have hard times. You can have miscues. You can have days where you're off. You can deal with or struggle with your classroom management and still be effectively making an impact on students. The second thing is that you can have both a calling and you can set boundaries. I like what the scripture says. It says, the man who lacks self control is like a city whose wall is broken down. And a lot of times we think about self control as like reckless behavior, going out and doing risky stuff and things of that nature. And for sure, that is a lack of self control. But you know what else is a lack of self control? It is a lack of self control to set boundaries for yourself. When we fail to set boundaries, we are failing to control our time. We're failing to control our limits. We're failing to control our spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical health. And we're like a city whose wall has broken down. And for those of you that maybe have never heard that proverb before, in the ancient time, a wall was intended to protect a city. And it doesn't necessarily protect the city by being restrictive. It's not trying to restrict the city because you can go in and out the gates all that you want. Rather, the boundaries or the gate or the wall is intended to keep things in their place. The things that need to stay out, stay out. The things that need to stay in, stay in. And as a teacher, there are some things that need to stay out. The voices that say, hey, you're not doing enough, that cause you to work yourself into oblivion. The voice that says, hey, maybe this isn't for you, that needs to stay out. The lies that, hey, you can't handle this, those lies need to stay out. All right. And some things that need to stay in, right, is the fact that God calls you to be faithful, faithful in showing up, faithful in planning and preparing, faithful to speak truth into the lives of students. All he's asked us to do is to sow seed. What does the scripture says? It says one man sows, another man waters, but it's who brings the harvest? God brings the harvest. God's in control of how what we do will ultimately bring an impact in the lives of the students that we serve. And number three, true impact flows from a rested and well grounded teacher. You have to take time to slow down. We cannot continue to buy into the lie of a system that says we have to wear our exhaustion as a badge of honor. It is not good to work without real rest. And when I say rest, I don't necessarily mean sleep, although sleep is rest. Rather, I mean times where we completely cut off any thought or any application of education, cutting it all off. No talk about school, no work about school, no emails, no thinking about the next unit that you have to get prepared for, or the parent meeting that you have to get prepared for first thing Monday morning, or the IEP, or the discipline problem that's in your room. You have to drown that all out and get rid of it and reset your mind. Find things that bring you joy, that make you happy. 3 years ago, I woke up and my face went completely paralyzed as a result of burnout. I would go to school and my kids were like, "Hey, Miller, did you have a stroke?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't have a stroke. I don't know what my face is doing." But it was paralyzed. I couldn't shut my eyes. I had to tape my eyes. I didn't even miss a day of work because I thought that made everybody look at me and say, "Man, look how dedicated he is." And you know what they really thought to themselves? Look at that fool. That's exactly what they thought. And in the midst of that, what happened is that God gave me a hobby of refurbishing furniture. I've never refurbished anything in my life. I don't have a creative bone in my body whatsoever. But God gave me that hobby of refurbishing furniture. And somehow through that hobby and through the sanctuary of my garage and his presence, he was able to heal me, not just physically, but he healed me mentally and emotionally, and more importantly, spiritually. True impact flows from a rested and grounded teacher. So let me ask you a question. What is it that you do for joy, for fun, for relaxation? Do you knit? Do you hike? Do you kayak? Do you work in your garage? Do you sit on the porch? Do you walk around the neighborhood? What is it that you do that you can implement in your life and take your mind completely off of things education related? Find that thing and then go do it and rest. Now, here's the thing. I don't know where you're at as a teacher. I don't know where you're at in your journey. I can only tell you where I'm at in mine. I'm 3 years post teacher burnout. As a matter of fact, Teacher Talk is was born out of that experience. And that's why we do what we do. And so what I want to say to you, teacher, I want to say to you that you haven't lost your calling. Yes, the days are hard, but this job is hard. This calling is hard. And it's through all of that hard things or all of those hard things that your faithfulness will impact the students that you've been called to serve. And God calls us to be faithful. Be faithful. Teachers, if you look right up there, there's a couple videos that YouTube wants you to watch. They're both about boundaries. One of those videos is the real life story of a teacher. So go check that one out and then check out the other one. But more importantly, go ahead and hit subscribe. And I want you to stay strong and keep teaching.